Okay, so now I want to come back to Opportunity and give you an update on what's happening actually with both of these rovers. But before we do that, right now we're actually not communicating with any of the spacecraft at Mars. We're in what's called conjunction, which happens about every 2 years. And here's the Earth, there's the Sun, there's Mars. So they're lined up, and you can't get radio communications to go through the Sun. So they shut down, or didn't shut them off, but put them in sort of very low activity modes for all of the spacecraft around the middle of July, so July 15th or so, and they'll be back online the first week in August. And here's a little, just an animation of how this works and why we need to do that.
What happens when the sun blocks our signal? About every 2 years, Earth and Mars wind up on opposite sides of the sun. That's called solar conjunction. It's like being on either side of a huge bonfire. We can't see Mars, and our landers, rovers, and orbiters can't see us. If our spacecraft send back signals, charged particles from the sun could interfere, causing gaps in the data that reach us. That's not a big deal. If something's missing, it can always be resent later. But no way do we want to lose data when we send up commands. Receiving a partial command could confuse the spacecraft, putting them in grave danger. So mission controllers plan ahead by sending up simple to-do lists, including regular health checkups. Back home, this break in communications lets team members catch up on other work, or take a well-deserved vacation. Solar conjunction lasts just a few weeks, then it's back to the grindstone, on Earth and on Mars.
Okay, so that's where we are right now. And I just wanted to bring you up to date on, I think the last time I was here was the end of May. And so we've had a couple of months of activity since the last update. And so today for Opportunity is the 4,800th Mars day since landing. Landed in January of 2004, and just to remind you, they were intended for 90 sols. A sol is a solar day, a Martian day, which is about 24 hours, 37 minutes. And so we've far exceeded the expectations for this mission. And so here's the overview of what they've been doing for the last 13 plus years. They landed up here, they've gone to numerous smaller craters, and for about the last 3 years they've been roving along the rim of this, it's about 20-kilometer diameter impact crater called Endeavour. And this is a view from Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter of the rim of Endeavour crater. Maybe you can see that little yellow line of where they've been sort of creeping along. And the most recent target for about the last 8 or 9 months was this little gully carved in the side of the crater rim. It's called Perseverance Valley. And the thinking is that this could be a sort of a breach in the crater wall when there was a lot of water outside of the crater. And so they want to actually drive down into this and see if the mineralogy and the morphology of the rocks would support the idea of having water running through that gully. And this is a closer up view. So here's the gully, and they think when they get down to the bottom of this, unless there's some overpowering reason to get back up and continue around, they may try to drive at least a little bit into Endeavour itself. And so this is easier to see the yellow line. So here's where we were about 3 months ago or so. And what they ended up doing, they arrived here, they sort of did a toe dip into Perseverance, and then they drove down here, up here, and now they're back in in Perseverance. And so this is the more detailed view. So here's where they arrived. They just sort of barely got in. They drove over here, taking images of the mouth of the valley, and then they circled around, and right now they're sitting right here. And so they're on a north-facing slope. It's approaching winter time in the southern hemisphere, where opportunity is just barely below the equator, but that optimizes the solar power on the solar panels. And so they're not likely to be moving a whole lot until later in the year, once winter has started moving back into spring. But I wanted to show you a couple of images. I think they're taken about right here, looking back at where the valley is. And so here's where they did their toe dip into the valley. This is part of the crater rim. Here's wheel tracks from the earlier drive through that area. And I think this next slide is color enhanced view. It just enhances the visibility of the wheel tracks. And once they got out of there, I'd mentioned they sort of drove back and forth. And when they were as far south in that traverse as what they were going to go, they had a problem with one of the front wheels. The wheels are, the two front and two rear wheels are independently steerable, and they had been attempting to turn a little bit, and this wheel froze in place at about a 30-degree angle from straight ahead. And you can see the tire track here, and it's canted compared to that. And they actually spent, well over a month diagnosing the wheel, and the last thing they wanted to do was have a failed wheel. The other wheel in the front has already failed. It's not providing power, so they have it set to freewheel, so they can drive using the other 5 wheels, but they don't get any grip out of that other wheel. And so it would be a huge deficit if they lose both of those. You'd only be able to drive backwards and pull those wheels behind you, and that's not a great way to do any kind of hill climbing, so they're being very careful. After about a month, they were able to straighten the wheel, and so now it's locked in place in terms of the angle, and it is under power, and so they were able to get back to normal operations. And so here's where they started their second dip into the crater. So this is looking down into the interior of Endeavour Crater. This is the Perseverance Valley. Doesn't look terribly rough, but what they're going to need to do is get up close to lots of these rocks and look at them in detail. And then this is where they are as of a week ago, and they haven't moved since. So there's the tire tracks leading up to this is the rim of the crater. So they're maybe a couple of tens of meters from the lip of the crater, moving slowly downward. And so when we get together next month, I'll report on what has happened once they woke the spacecraft back up in about 2 weeks. So there's our recap for Opportunity. Again, it's day 4,800. It's driven almost 45 kilometers so far. Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a long ways, but just think of that's 13 years of driving. And I'm sure we could all walk that in a couple of days. And anyway, better slow than sorry, I think, is the credo for these spacecraft. Plus, they like to stop and spend weeks and weeks and weeks abusing all the rocks that they come up to, so drilling them and finding out what they're made of. Okay, and then the final thing is they've returned 221,000 odd images in that time. So, still healthy, relatively, for a spacecraft that's outlived its design life by something like a factor of 50, and we're looking forward to more to come.